everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Joli. And today we're going to be taking you through some of the top tips and tricks to keep your houseplants happy and healthy. I made another video a while back when I first started YouTube on some other really great houseplant hacks, so I'll link that video in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave a comment down below about any plants that you're currently struggling with and I'll make sure to cover them in a video at some point. So the number one top tip / piece of advice that I would give, I know I bang on about this one a lot, so any regular viewers, I'm sorry, but it's important, so I'm going to say it again, is that underwatering is always better than overwatering. This is something that I really wish I'd known more about when I first started getting into houseplants, just because I got some plants and I wanted to care for them all the time. I didn't really realize that overwatering was a thing or a bad thing. And so, yeah, I lost quite a lot to overwatering. I also didn't realize for ages that it was actually overwatering that was killing them, because it's not always immediately obvious. It's one of the biggest killers in houseplants. It's so ridiculously easy to do, and it's the number one cause of a lot of common issues. Everything from weird leaf spots to yellowing leaves to dropping and drooping leaves, all of that stuff can be caused by overwatering. So firstly, it is so important to research exactly how much water your individual plants like and need. Each type of plant will prefer slightly different amounts. For example, some love a consistently moist soil and others love the soil to almost completely dry out between waterings. So, for example, if you were to water an aloe vera at the same rate as a calathea or alocasia, then you'd probably end up killing the aloe vera pretty quickly. The reason that I always say that less is more is just because it's usually so much easier to revive a houseplant that's been given too little water as opposed to too much. Had to take a 2-minute break because she got a bit needy. Too much water can lead to things such as root rot, which, although it can be fixable, often leads to plants rotting away, dying, having no root system left to support them, basically. I have actually spoken before about ways that you can treat root rot, so I'll post that in the description box below. Whenever I get a new plant, I always research how much moisture it enjoys in the soil. That way I don't have to stick to kind of a strict watering schedule. I can just monitor the plant, monitor the soil, and go off that. I personally just stick my finger down to the soil and feel to tell when it's ready for a water, but you can also use moisture meters for this as well. Terracotta pots as well are a really brilliant way to help regulate watering if you know that perhaps you're slightly prone to going overboard. Last thing I'll say on this, because I know I talk about it all the time, but the environment of everyone's homes are always going to offer slightly different conditions with your plants in regards to things like heat, light, humidity, all those things. It's never going to be the same everywhere. So, for example, if the internet is telling you that you should be watering a certain plant once a week and you're still having issues with it, I would personally say scrap the schedule and just monitor the soil, monitor your plant and go off that, as opposed to saying religiously I'm going to water at 2:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening. The next tip is to choose plants that you know are likely to do well in your home based on their light requirements. This might sound totally obvious, but if you go out and pick up a highlight tropical plant and your home only offers very low levels of light, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a bit of a failure, unless of course you are willing to invest in grow lights. In the same way as the watering, different types of plants are going to require different amounts of light. For example, some plants are going to do really well in 8+ hours of direct sun, and others will grow much better in lower light conditions. Again, research is key. When I was younger, one of my first plants was a Dracaena, and I didn't realise anything about lighting conditions for plants. I just put her in the brightest possible spot I could find and just assumed that that would be the best thing for her. She'd grow really quickly, and instead she just ended up getting really, really sunburnt. All of her leaves turned brown. It didn't look very nice. And then when I actually did some research about how much light Dracaenas are like and realised it was much lower, kind of indirect light, she started to do a lot better and her growth sped right up. If you're not sure exactly what to research because you're not quite sure what exact type of plant you've got, then feel free to ping me a message on Instagram with some photos and I will do my best to help. This is one that I briefly touched on in my last houseplant hacks video, but I'm going to say it again because it's super important. Keeping your plant's leaves clean is absolutely vital. A buildup of dust and dirt on the leaves means that they won't be able to absorb light in the way that they need to in order to photosynthesize and grow healthily. And also it makes them much more prone to pests. In their natural habitat, leaves are cleaned by rainwater, but as houseplants, that buildup of dust can happen quite quickly and it can cause quite a lot of issues if it's not dealt with. I try to dust and wipe down my plants' leaves as often as I possibly can, as well as just giving them a rotate every now and then so that they can absorb equal amounts of light from all angles. Rotating your plants regularly also just means that the growth is going to be a lot more full and even as opposed to stretched and leaning. The next indoor plant tip is to not jump in and repot a plant too quickly after you first get it. Whether you've picked it up at a garden centre or you've ordered it online, wherever you've got it from, chances are the environment of your home is going to be really quite different to where it's come from. Jumping in and repotting when your plant hasn't had the time to properly adjust to its new environment can send them into shock, it can stunt their growth, cause dropping leaves, and in really, really bad cases, it can actually kill them. I've picked up plants before that I can tell are ridiculously root bound and do need repotting, but unless there's kind of really clear issues with the foliage that need to be addressed immediately, I'll always just leave it at least a week or two to acclimatise before I repot it. A little side note on that as well, just to be aware, because I definitely wasn't always, when you get a new plant, if it doesn't look completely healthy, if you suspect there might be kind of some underlying issues, don't just jump in and try and treat those issues yourself, because as I found out the hard way, sometimes if the plant isn't treatable but you've tried to fix it, then that can actually void your refund replacement policy with the seller that you purchased it from. I ordered a plant a while back that arrived in a really, really, really bad state, and I sent pictures and everything to the seller. I let them know the situation, and then in the meantime I pruned back a lot of the dead growth. I checked the roots. It had root rot, so obviously I treated it for root rot, and then the seller said that because I'd done these things, I now wasn't eligible for a refund. So always contact the seller first. So yeah, in a nutshell, allow your plant at least a few weeks to adapt to its new environment with you before you disrupt its conditions even more. The other thing I'd say as well about bringing new plants into your home is that changing the top layer of soil, literally just like the first top inch, not repotting the whole plant, is a really, really good thing to do, just in case it's been around other plants with pests and there might be eggs or anything like that lurking in the soil. On a similar note, I always recommend keeping your new plants isolated for the first couple of weeks, just in case they're carrying any pests or diseases or anything like that that might not be immediately obvious and could be passed on to your other plants. As I say, it's not always obvious straight away, and these things can spread really, really quickly. So to be on the safe side, I would always recommend a little quarantine period. On the note of repotting, a few things that I wish I'd known sooner and are super, super important. Firstly, making sure you use the right size pot. It is so easy to think that moving a plant that's in quite a small pot into a much, much bigger one will just allow it more space to grow faster and bigger, but that is definitely not always the case. Using a much bigger pot means also using much more soil, and if the roots of your plant are quite small and they're not big enough to absorb all of the moisture that soil is going to hold, then it can lead to issues such as root rot, mold, lots of things that essentially could take your plant out pretty quickly. I'll usually move up between 1 and 3 pot sizes when I repot my plants and no more. If I'm potting up propagations, obviously depending how many I'm potting up in one pot, I tend to start really, really small, kind of like a 5 centimetre pot or something like that, and then gradually increase it as time goes on. Secondly, finding the right soil mix for individual plants makes all of the difference. Again, something I knew absolutely nothing about when I first started out, but I've seen now how it can really improve or worsen the condition of your plants. Research again here is key. Some plants are going to love a soil that retains lots of moisture, others are going to love a soil that's really well draining, others like ones that are slightly more acidic or alkaline, etc., etc. You can buy pre-mixed soils, or you can actually mix up your own. If anyone's got any questions about what kind of soil mix would be good for what kind of plant, then feel free to let me know down below and I'll do my best to help. Tip number 6 is to leave your plant in its nursery pot. This doesn't mean that you can't put the nursery pot inside a pretty ceramic pot or basket or anything like that. It's just that on the same note as my first point, it means you'll be able to make sure it's properly had time to drain each time after watering. The same goes for whenever you repot your plants. I would recommend just moving them up a couple of sizes to a bigger nursery pot instead of planting them straight directly into a ceramic one. That way, when I can see that a plant's ready for a water, I can just lift it out of the ceramic pot, give it a thorough soak through in the nursery pot, let it properly drain, and then pop it back into the pretty pot. The only exception to this is if you're using terracotta pots, as I spoke about before, but they almost always come with drainage holes as well. Even if your pretty ceramic pot does have a drainage hole, in my experience, they can still often hoard water and not provide enough drainage compared to the the plastic nursery pots that have loads of drainage holes at the bottom. Also, if you need to check the roots of your plant at any point, it's so much easier and so much less messy as well to just lift it out of a nursery pot. The next tip is to fertilise your plants, but only when they actually need it. If you've recently repotted a plant using a good quality soil, chances are for the first few months at least, it probably won't need any extra nutrients from fertiliser, and if you give it more, you risk overdoing it. Fertilising is only recommended to be done over the growing season, which tends to be the spring and summer months, when your plants are growing at a much faster rate. By fertilising them during this time, it helps to support and encourage full, bushy, healthy, happy growth by providing them a balance of nutrients that they might not always be getting enough of from the soil alone. Also, if you've got a houseplant that hasn't been repotted in a while and chances are has used up all of the nutrients that are naturally in the soil, then adding fertiliser into the equation can really help kick that plant back into action. Outside of the growing season, although some people will probably say differently, I would personally recommend completely laying off the fertiliser. When they're not in a state of active growth, feeding them lots of extra nutrients that they don't need can actually cause a buildup of salts and minerals and stuff like that in the soil, and it can also lead to something called fertiliser burn, which affects the roots of your plants, but you'll often notice it as big brown, yellow, dark patches that appear on your plant's leaves. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that the growth of your plants will completely stop during the winter months. I'm just saying that it naturally slows down during that time, so any new growth you do see won't necessarily benefit from being fertilised. This next tip might be totally obvious to some of you that have dealt with this before, but don't ever ignore signs of pests. Even if you can't actually see physical bugs on your plant, sometimes if you notice that there's changes in the foliage, if there looks like there's damage that wasn't there before, this can be a sign that maybe there's pests lurking somewhere nearby and your plants could be at risk. I spoke about this in a video recently that I made about thrips, but I know all too well how easy it is for one or two insects that you might very easily miss to multiply almost overnight and turn into hundreds, affecting all of your houseplants. Some common signs of pests can be damage to the leaves, like little trails where it looks like it's been nibbled sometimes. Sticky leaves, sticky undersides of the leaves particularly, you'll often notice little droplets of sap there. Sandy residue on the leaves, little spiders' webs. The list goes on. Even if you can't actually see any pests themselves, any one of those symptoms that I just said would, for me, be cause to isolate that plant and any it's been around just in case. On that note, checking for pests on a regular basis is really, really important unless you want to risk a massive infestation that ends up bringing down all of your houseplants. There's so many other houseplant tips and tricks that I could have included in this video. As I say, I did make another one about it a while ago, so that's down below. But if you found this video useful, then do let me know and I will make more like this soon. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.